The Tales of series, one of my favorite video game franchises of all time. Ever since 2005, I've become a fan of the series due to its battle system that utilizes real-time fighting game mechanics and of the narratives that each of the games provide. So I thought I'd take this time to recollect my memories and provide my personal feedback on almost all of the localized titles in the series, with some small additions here or there. I say almost because the only localized Tales of games that I haven't done a complete playthrough of are Tales of Heartsar on the Vita and Tales of Berseria on the PS4. Otherwise, I own and finished every other localized Tales of title throughout the years. Also, this recollection will only focus on the localized versions of the game, so that means no graces on the Wii, Destiny R, and so on and so forth. How this recollection is going to work is that I'll be going through the games in localization release order. I'll note the year when I initially picked up the game, and the year I've completed my last playthrough, and will rate the game out of 5. I'm weighing both gameplay and narrative as major factors in the rating process. If the gameplay and narrative are subpar at best, then the rating will also be subpar. However, if either gameplay or narrative end up being above average to amazing, then the rating will also reflect this. The same also applies for the other side of the spectrum. Keep in mind that these are my own recollections, so for some of these titles, these impressions aren't necessarily fresh, as you'll note on the last time I played through the game. Maybe someday I'll be able to review these games altogether by giving them one more playthrough each, but we'll see what happens as time goes by. With that said, this is Panban Richard presenting to you my Tales of Recollections. Tales of Destiny, the original boomer title that breathed life into the series. When I played this game in 2014, I very much enjoyed and appreciated the quirks this game had. It well represented the time of its production. For example, when you board on a ship and you're tasked with defeating swarms of enemies that approach you, instead of battling them in a linear motion battle system, you suddenly play a Galaga-esque minigame. I understand that there are some people who aren't fond of sudden gameplay changes, but I'm not one of those people. They're there to help you relax and to remind you that you're playing a video game, so have fun. Regarding the narrative, Act 1 and 2 both have the advantage of focusing on the humanity of the main characters, Dawn Aileron. And surprisingly, this Tales of game is one of the very few that don't dive deep into discrimination, so maybe that might entice you to play this one. Only things I'll nitpick is the fact that while the gameplay set the foundation for many staple mechanics in the series, it was a bit rough going through it as I constantly had to order my party members to do everything, because they weren't really doing much on their own. Also, the localization script represents the late 90s, and I can see that turning some people off. Overall, Tales of Destiny on the PlayStation 1 gets a solid 3 out of 5 from me. First off, can I get this out of the way? Tales of Eternia wasn't renamed Destiny 2 because of He-Man. According to an IGN interview, they renamed it Tales of Destiny 2 to sort of keep in line with how Final Fantasy named their titles. Yeah, I fell for it too. Anyway, Tales of Eternia. I love this game's narrative and main character. Reed Herschel can be defined as the everyday guy who just wants to hunt for a living. In other words, you can label him as an NPC. If it weren't for his childhood friend Farah pushing him to entertain her adventurous attitude, then Reed would not have discovered his calling in life. It's a grand story of one's discovery of his responsibility for what he is tasked to do for the world. Honestly, the Save for Trial scene is my favorite example of gameplay story integration in the entire franchise, and it's worth picking up just to experience how well handled they were. I dare not spoil them here. The gameplay mechanics took a lot of upgrades in the 2D linear motion battle system formula, however the AI isn't quite perfect, despite strategy adjustments. Keel, you're a spellcaster, stop running into the enemy and smashing them, buddy. Reed and Farah can handle it just fine on their own. The narrative of this game and solid gameplay system puts this game high up there for me, 4 out of 5. Tales of Symphonia, mine and plenty of others' gateway title into the franchise. Even though the narrative is average, even though the villain's motivations weren't that effective for me in-game, there's just a certain charm to Symphonia since it's the first 3D title in the franchise. Call it nostalgia? Maybe, but it's a game that I can pick up every now and then and surely enjoy. There are certain characters that have quite a bit of depth to them, and because of that depth and variety, there are plenty of personalities and motivations for the audience to sink their teeth into, or rip apart. That's the beauty of a solid cast in my opinion. The battle system is still rough around the edges, but it maintains the whole point of Tales of games, to use their individual strengths to collaborate and defeat the foe in front of you. To even complement this, the AI is not as bad as how they were handled in previous titles, so it's nice to see this upgrade in this game. People tend to compare this game as like the Final Fantasy VII of the Tales of franchise, and well, I didn't play through a single Final Fantasy game, so I really wouldn't know, but if that means that it's the title that everyone would recommend and it still has a bit of that nostalgia to it, then hey, give it a shot anyway, but for me, this game gets a 4 out of 5. Before I continue, let me reiterate that I am only going to focus on the localized releases in this series. So no Super Famicom, no PlayStation 1, or PlayStation Portable versions. Just sticking with the official localization, which is the GBA. However, I do encourage you to play those versions. Anyway, the GBA version of Fantasia is also my oldest game in my history that I haven't done a recent playthrough of yet, so these memories aren't quite as fresh as I'd hoped them to be. I love the villain. I mean, Dallas is probably one of the better villains of the franchise who has a sympathetic motivation. I still remember how much of an atypical hero Cress is, and every series needs that character, so I'm alright with Cress filling in that role. And Chester and Archie have a fun dynamic relationship between them. This video series is reminding me that I do need to replay this version of the game someday, but the GBA version is very clunky for a battle system that was remade from the PlayStation. You try to guard, but instead you order your party members around, it's kind of a mess. Like I said before, there are better versions of this game that have refined mechanics and non-excluded content, but for the GBA version I have to give it a 2 out of 5, which is only saved by its narrative, to be honest. What is this doing here? Well, Narikiri Dungeon 3 is in fact my first imported Tales of game when I was still in middle school. I remember first being exposed to this game thanks to the helpful patch by one Kajitani 8-san in 2006, and I enjoyed my experience so much that a friend of mine at school helped me import this game, and I never played Tales of Fantasia on the GBA ever since. There was so much liberation in this game's battle system, and it was very intriguing for me to personally see the Symphonia characters in 2D. Not only that, but the Fantasia characters were free from that awful battle system in their own port. Honestly, I wouldn't be lying if this game did pique my interest into the other games, because it was a lot of fun discovering the techniques of the other characters that I wasn't familiar with, learning about the magic-based characters in Destiny, how upgraded in techniques and spells the Destiny 2 characters were, and how unique Reed's arts were from Eternia. I can see the strategy RPG mechanics turning some people off, but the important thing for me is that it was able to maintain a smooth 2D linear motion battle system on a portable console. Better than whatever that Fantasia GBA port was. Narikiri Dungeon 3 is such a solid title in the GBA era of Tales of games, and it's probably the best one in my opinion. 3 out of 5. In 2006, when this game was localized, I remembered everybody hating on it, mostly due to the battle system, and it was because of this feedback that I saw when I was younger, I decided to get Fantasia on the GBA. Yep. So when I picked this game up from a local ad, I said to myself, okay, where's Tales of Game, show me what you got, and then I get slammed by its gorgeous soundtrack by Goshina, and its intriguing narrative. I want to get this out of the way first. The battle system is not that bad. Oh, it's not perfect by any means. I'll take Fantasia Narikiri Dungeon Cross or Fantasia Cross any day if I want to play a 2D Tales of game. But it's passable. I mean, you get to throw things with Senel, and the other melee users have unique quirks to them too. Now that I got that out of the way, what enticed me about the game is its narrative. My goodness, after playing other games in the franchise, I wanted something fresh, and this game definitely delivered. With the main narrative focusing on Senel and Shirley, it's ultimately about Senel's growth in trust, romance, and realization. Even though the discrimination trope still exists in this game, it kinda makes a complete 180 and, well, pop in the game and you'll see why. Character is the strongest suit Legendia's narrative has to provide. And the fact that the side quests in this game are basically personal quests for the rest of the party members to grow is amazing as is. You know a game's narrative is great when I can't even bring myself to finish it. Not because it's bad, but because it's just that good. And I only want to break it out for special occasions. Maybe my opinion may change when I replay this game, but for now, worst Tales of ever? With a narrative like this? I don't think so. 5 out of 5. Ah, Tales of the Abyss. I remember picking this up at launch and was ecstatic to finish it up in a month's time. The main cast once again exude different personalities and motivations that are varied enough for the audience to have someone they love and someone they hate. Despite the very awkward Exariud plot point, which I felt the writers wrote first and even made some characters appear a bit out of character, it's still a nice coming-of-age story. Gameplay-wise, this title is a lot of fun. It's as if everyone feels overpowered so that they can match up to their foes who are just as overpowered as they are. There are a ton of factors in battle that contribute to that overpowered state, such as phone slot chambers, field of phonons, and AD skills, especially the free run skill, which allows you to move freely on the 3D plane. I feel I need to replay this one more time to solidify my opinion of it, but overall it's a very solid title. Just don't finish the main narrative in 3 days straight. Trust me. 4 out of 5. I don't really remember this game that well. I mean, it's fine in its own right, outclassed by future iterations, but this is the only one of the 3 Radiant mythologies that got localized. So let's talk about its positives. The customization options for your own character is decent, and the 3D linear motion battle system made a good transition to the PSP with this game. The roster is lacking, but it was nice to see the characters from different games interact with each other in an actual game release. Plus, you get to prove your worth against some of these characters in solo battles late game. As far as I know, the narrative to this game is different from the sequels following it because they don't focus on an outbreak of creatures, instead focusing on a villain with a different motivation. Kinda. Maybe I should replay this game, but there are some artifacts to it that are hard to go back to, like some of the tales of characters who appeared unplayable, and while the unison attack was great in Symphonia, it's not as in-depth here and felt slapped on. Regardless, just a decent title at best. 2 out of 5. Tales of Vesperia, another gateway title for many, and I'm pretty sure all of you know how much of an impact this game has. The choice in cell shading for this game's graphics engine made it age like a fine wine. I'm not a huge fan of its narrative, and the only act I liked out of it was Act 2, when it focused on the parallels and contrasts of justice between Yuri and Flynn. I wanted more of that, but instead we got another Act 3 in the franchise that kinda meanders around discrimination, but not really. I mean, if you played other titles outside of Tales of Rebirth, you get the idea. The highlight of this game is in its battle system. If I have one regret in my initial playthrough is that I wish I spent time with its battle system more, because I didn't have a firm grasp on the skill system. But based on how much this game's linear motion battle system was dissected by so many Tales of Challenge runners out there, I can't ignore how in-depth this game is. Even though many people are clamoring for a port of the PS3 remake, the 360 version is still fine. It's still playable and self-contained. Honestly, if this game were to make a comeback, I'd like to see the narrative to focus more on the justice theme. 3 out of 5. I get everybody's gripes with the romance and the lack of importance with the original cast, but if you look past that, then you have a game that's not as bad as it seems. The narrative is your standard revenge plot that transforms into a realization of self, which was okay. I mean, it's not as strong as Abyss's or Innocence's realization, but it's passable. And the romance doesn't get as obnoxious when you're at the middle of the game, but I can still see it turning some people off. The linear motion battle system to this game is pretty solid as well. Both Emil and Marta are capable characters who complement each other in battle. Also, the monster mechanic is surprisingly in-depth for an escort title. I was actually worrying about which monsters were compatible, what type of evolutions I can acquire, and which unison attacks work well for the enemy that I'm about to face. Speaking of which, the unison attack system in this game isn't quite like how it was in Symphonia 1. Instead, it's like a different take of the Field of Phonon mechanic in Abyss, and I enjoyed exploring that. The only gripes that I have include getting a game over when all of your human characters in the party die, despite your monsters living. I mean, monsters should have had a skill that can allow them to use items, and the Symphonia 1 characters needed a higher level cap. Otherwise, this game is fine as a standalone title with its original characters, but not a good sequel for the Symphonia 1 cast. 3 out of 5. The first 3D Tales of Mothership game to utilize chain capacity, and I'm not a particular fan of this one. It's a Tales of 3D game that limits your mobility with free run. I get that sidestepping is encouraged, but it makes you wonder why it's even there in the first place. That and the regenerating mooks in boss fights? Please don't do that, Tales of. The battle system kinda felt like a step backward for me, but I can see what they were trying to go for. I just didn't enjoy it, which is unfortunate because I see a lot of fans of this game praising it and even showing off its mechanics. It just didn't appeal to me at the end of the day. The narrative is also about sticking together as a group as they discovered a common mystery about Sophie, only to witness an even bigger threat. But that also didn't hook me in. I wanted more of Asbel's struggles after the time skip, but that was hopped over within a couple of hours and they just focused on the mystery of Sophie. I mean, I like Sophie as a character, but other than that, the narrative didn't really have much else for me. Besides Pascal and Fourier, that was really good. Maybe I should give this game one more playthrough, but based on my current recollections, I'm giving it a 2 out of 5. But feel free to give it a shot if you want. This is when the Tales of games started to create this mishmash of both the Team Symphonia and Team Destiny style of gameplay. I enjoy the fact that every character has their own unique quirks, not just in arts and battle maneuverability, but in specific gameplay attributes as well. It was fun seeing the characters have their own unique attributes that affect their entire gameplay, and it makes for a fun exploration between them all. The problem for this game with me is linking. I remember when I was playing this game with friends, and when we were getting utterly creamed by this one enemy, I literally had to say, sorry, I have to link with you, which means you don't get to play, and you have to watch me win. Linking only creates the visual of teamwork, as opposed to actually timing your moves with your party to synergize and create long combos. Here is just a means of mashing one button while you're linked, and you'll achieve the combo yourself. It may look like you're working together, but the sensation of actually achieving that synergy doesn't come as naturally as it would in previous titles. Still, it's not a terrible mechanic, and it does carry the game in single player. The narrative is just blasé for me, but I definitely enjoyed Act 4 of Jude's story, where it fully shows Mila's importance to the party, as she wasn't a character that required to grow, but she inspired the party to grow. Apparently this game was somewhat unfinished, but I thought it was still fine, so I give it a 3 out of 5. Ever want a game where you put almost your entire cast through their own personal hells just for the hell of it? Well, this is the narrative for you. Maybe that's a bit of an over-exaggeration, but when this game does this, it goes pretty deep. The whole choice mechanic doesn't really lead up to that many circumstances except for affection points, which was straight up borrowed from Tales of Symphonia. There are only 2 points where the decisions really do affect the narrative at the end of the day, but for a game focused on choice, your choices don't have much effect. The gameplay is still the same from Exilia 1 with some polish and 3 additional characters, so my pros and cons about Exilia 1 still exist. Ludger's weapon switching mechanic is a lot of fun to experiment with. It kinda makes me wish that there was a game that incorporated his playstyle for the entire cast. But the one big factor that deters this game further from the theme of teamwork is the chromatis. The game places you in scenarios where the chromatis is required to advance, and is so essential to progress that the game doesn't want you to switch out the lead hero in your party, a practice that didn't exist since the first 2 games in the entire franchise. As much as I enjoyed playing as Ludger, his chromatis just furthered the series away from the franchise's focus. That, along with his sadness train moments, makes it subpar for me. 2 out of 5. After playing through games such as Graces F, Exilia, and Exilia 2, I decided to pick this game up. Now, whatever you feel about the Tales series is up to you, and I wasn't actively thinking this when I was playing through the previous games. However, I've noticed that I wasn't having too much fun with the Tales of franchise than I used to. Was it because of age, exhaustion? I don't know what it was, but when I was playing through Innocence R in 2015, halfway through the game I legitimately exclaimed, I feel like I'm playing an actual Tales of game again, and that's when it clicked for me. Tales of Innocence R reminded me how much I love the series' linear motion battle system. Seventh Chord did a great job being faithful to what made Innocence on the DS click, but transitioned it to a standard Team Symphonia style game. Each character has their own unique battle capabilities, and it's a joy exploring how well they synergize with each other. And I'm not talking about visual synergy with the link system, I'm talking about actual synergy where their skills and attacks can complement each other. The game system rewards you for maintaining a high hit count with the Rave system, and that's exemplified more with the counter system, which also exists in Hearts R. The narrative is just okay for me, just another realization story of the main characters. I really wish the narrative played more with the struggle between past and present self of the characters, because it could have been more intriguing with such a unique premise, but instead, only maybe a quarter of the cast gets this experience fully realized. This game is my favorite 3D linear motion battle system in the entire franchise, and thus gets a 5 out of 5. A polarizing Tales of game in the franchise has created 2 camps I've noticed in the fandom. You either love this game or you don't, and I unfortunately stand with the latter. It's a game that after I finished 2 playthroughs of within 2 months, it's just hard for me to pick it up and play it again. I couldn't even be bothered to finish the DLC. I feel as though 2 minutes isn't enough time to elaborate on this, so let me focus on the positives I have instead. Go Shina's contributions to the soundtrack are such a highlight. While the songs aren't varied in genre like Legendia's, you can hear Shina's flavor in the tracks that he made. Rising Up, I will state, is the best vocal song in the entire franchise, and it certainly fits the mood for the moment that it was building up to. The characters' personalities have some nice chemistry between them that complement the lighthearted moments of the game, alongside the moments when their trust in each other shines. I also felt that the English dub did a great job bringing these characters to life. It's just, I wasn't a fan of everything else. Again, a 2-minute video isn't enough time to elaborate on my thoughts, so maybe I'll have an opportunity to do that in the future. In the meantime, my rating for Zestiria is a 1 out of 5, but to be honest, if you enjoyed the game, you already know what you feel about it, so more power to you. And if you want to give it a shot, look at some playthrough videos online before doing so. After the feedback that Tales of Zestiria had, which were vastly negative despite its legitimate fans, all eyes were on the next title in the franchise, which was revealed at Tales Fest 2015 as Tales of Berseria. This game featured the first solo female lead protagonist in the series, and it seemed like a step in the right direction. However, expectations became somewhat stilted when it was revealed that this game was going to be a very distant prequel to Tales of Zestiria. I was a bit exhausted with the series after Zestiria that I didn't bother to finish any Tales of games since 2015, so I picked up Berseria and I enjoyed it. The battle system, while it may not be true to the TP system that I personally like, I can say for sure that this is my favorite battle system that doesn't use the TP formula. The Break Soul system gives a lot of incentive to try out the other characters, and the game's tutorials does give that accessibility factor on how you operate all the characters' unique abilities. It was a joy exploring each character's pros and cons, and accentuating their strengths in battle. By the way, we finally have another freshly localized home console game that doesn't rely on any form of linking characters. So you're encouraged to once again achieve that synergy that was a firm foundation in the earlier games of the series. My only gripes battle-wise was discovering how broken Velvet was with her Break Soul that I ended up not using her too much in my initial playthrough. Nor was I looking forward to it as I was rotating between characters because her Break Soul is just that game breaking. But unlike Armatization or the Chromatus, Velvet's Break Soul isn't necessarily required to progress through the game. I like the plot as well. It focuses on familial ties between Velvet and several other characters that influenced her to be who she was at the start of the game, and how her understanding of those relationships evolved at the end. Almost every other character in the party goes through different elements of relationships to specific people, and it's these personal motivations that align with Velvet's being the reason why they stick together. It's a refreshing sight to see compared to what I got in Zestiria. Again, sorry Zesty fans, but I'm really not a fan of that game at the end of the day. But that's the key. This game's lasting impression for me was strong enough to make me even consider giving Zestiria another chance. Maybe. And there was a lot of fan service in this game that made it feel like an anniversary title for Tales of fans, while still being accessible to newcomers. For me, Tales of Berseria gets a 4 out of 5.